Hey, how's it going, guys? Thank you for tuning in to VR Revelations. Welcome back. I know it's been a couple of months since I've uploaded any videos to the channel. Unfortunately, I've lost a couple of subscribers, but that's okay, guys. I'm going to start uploading more videos. There's a lot of things to talk about. Of course, it's an election year in the United States, and it's. I think it's going to get pretty wild in politics, as it's already is, as it has been for a couple of years now. But I think one of the most important uh, topics of discussion right now has to be international politics, right? Especially everything going on right now uh, in Ukraine, in Israel, with these wars that really can lead to disastrous consequences, and they already are leading to disastrous consequences. Because what can be more disastrous than human beings losing their lives, as many people are right now in the conflict in Israel? Uh, uh, the war they declared on Hamas, and all of the things that are taking place there, and all of the Palestinians that are dying, as well as Jews, and everything going on in Ukraine right now, and all of the Ukrainians and Russian soldiers that are dying. These things just don't, vanish away. They have consequences. This blood that is being spilled is having consequences, and is going to have further consequences, which we just really can't tell exactly what those consequences are, but we can sort of estimate what they might be. And of course, the conflict right now in Ukraine, you don't have to be a rocket scientist to see that um, it can turn into a global nuclear conflict if humanity isn't careful right now. If the United States isn't careful, they can push Russia up against the wall to such a point where they will see that their only option is to use their most powerful weapons, that is, nuclear bombs. And so it is a very real threat that we are facing, and that's why I like speaking about international politics and situations taking place right now, because they overshadow these smaller regional uh, discussions, right? Or topics such as are happening in the U.S., but not so much so right now, because depending on who wins the election in the United States, it's also going to affect the things that are taking place internationally right now. So we know that Trump has said that he's going to stop this war taking place in Ukraine. I'm not so sure about that, but he said he would do it on day one. And at the very least, we can assume that he's going to try, as opposed to Biden's administration right now, who is trying to get more money and weapons sent over to Ukraine, therefore furthering the war. And so the topic of discussion for this video, or what I wanted to give you my thoughts on, was the Tucker Carlson interview, which he did with President Vladimir Putin of Russia. Now, a lot of people have given their opinions. Of course, a lot of people said that this was a good interview. They sort of praised Tucker Carlson for traveling to Russia, for having the courage, for having the desire, the initiative to go and speak with the leader of Russia and get his take and his thoughts, sort of given him a platform to be heard, not just in Russia, but in the Western part of the world, where pretty much all we hear are, bad things about Vladimir Putin, the Western media propaganda machine is always telling the public that Putin is essentially trying to conquer the world, that he's like, the greatest evil right now. And of course, we know that's not true. If you understand anything about propaganda, you know that whoever is giving the news tends to be biased, right? They tend to not be completely honest with the other person's point of view or their ideas or their thoughts or their reasons. They really don't care about that, but rather defending their own point of view and trying to get their point across. And so we can't expect anything less from governments. Governments are really the best at this. And I believe Tucker Carlson at one point asked Vladimir Putin why he doesn't push back on the Western news, on the Western propaganda with his own news and his own propaganda on the same type of scale. And Vladimir Putin sort of chuckled and left it off and said that it's really futile to try and compete with Western media because the U.S., he said, controls essentially the global news, right? All of these major networks. Essentially, the U.S. is the top dog when it comes to propaganda. And so he said that what Russia does is just, give its own position in these press conferences, and he lets the people decide what they want to believe. He also mentioned that, there are a lot of reporters or news sources or even alternative media such as this one that do try and report on Russia's point of view or try to look at both sides and the reason as to why each side is doing and saying what they're saying. And so my thoughts on the Tucker Carlson interview are that I thought that it was a good interview. Pretty much what the West wanted to see from Tucker is to go up there and sort of confront Vladimir Putin with all of these Western media propaganda talking points, but that wouldn't have made a good interview. It would have made for a good showing for Tucker if he wanted to please the U.S. government and the CIA and the military-industrial complex, right? But you got to understand, that's not what Tucker was looking to do. He was honestly trying to go over there to Russia and let Vladimir Putin speak and give his reasons as to why he is carrying out this special military operation in Ukraine. And again, it's almost sort of surprising how unaware the American public and the Western public is to the reasons and the actions that led to Russia invading Ukraine. I mean, all you have to do is just do a brief search on Google and look at what led us up to this point, right? And I think Putin did a great job. It's pretty funny because there was a whole bunch of memes on how Putin literally went back to like the 900s and started talking about Russia's history and literally drove it all the way up till present day. So kudos to Putin and his memory at his age. There's a lot of talk about Joe Biden's mental capabilities right now, as well as Trump's. Well, that was pretty impressive by Vladimir Putin. Not only did he have the ability to narrate Russia's history from the 900s up until modern day, but he was able to keep a coherent thought process, which is difficult even for younger people like you and I. And he did it while Tucker Carlson interrupted a couple of times. And, he would answer Tucker or uh, express his discontent with Tucker's interruptions. And then he would go back to where he left off in the narrative as he was telling Tucker Russia's history as to why it was important in the context of the war going on right now, and he would pick up right where he left off and continued to go back to where he left off and continued to finish saying what he wanted to say. And that was to explain Russia's history, all of the conflicts that Russia has been involved in, how Russia has changed throughout the course of history, the political climates at those points, the changes in governments, and then how all that led to what we are seeing now. And, Tucker Carlson was very patient. I think that was very good of him. And if you actually pay attention to what Putin was saying, he literally touched on all the points that most people were criticizing Tucker for not asking. So Tucker Carlson didn't ask the questions, but Vladimir Putin literally covered most of the talking points of the West in his 2-hour discourse. And so, we already know why Russia invaded Ukraine, and it's very simple. You don't have to go into all of the minute details. The simple fact is that the United States, the biggest global empire, the most powerful empire right now in the world in terms of its economic ability and its military expansion. And I say that because I believe Russia, pound for pound, is the most powerful army in the world because of its nuclear capabilities and its hypersonic missile technology. Now, it's not all over the world like the US, but it literally tested the biggest nuclear bomb ever detonated during the Cold War, the Tsar Bomba. And so, they can destroy the world just like the United States can. But this is just, pure international military expansionism from the U.S. They're right up on Russia's borders. They had a couple of agreements, whether they were written or verbal, really doesn't matter, that after World War II, during the Cold War race, the U.S. sort of promised that they would not try to expand the NATO alliance up to Russia's borders, right? And they broke their promise, as most governments do, but especially the U.S. They like to make these promises and then later on claim that, oh, it was never written on paper. Well, then what good is your word, right? But anyways, they meddled in Ukraine, in the Ukraine elections, right? They overthrew the government there. They installed a government that was useful to the U.S., and then over time, they continued to manipulate Ukraine to have an aggressive anti-Russian attitude, and not necessarily all of the people, but the people in power, right? Zelensky in this case. And then the news came out that Ukraine was seeking to join the NATO alliance. And so Russia clearly warned that they could not allow that. Now, here's the great hypocrisy of the United States, right? They like to argue that, they're fighting, they're defending Ukrainian sovereignty, the right for them to be who they want to be, the right for them to have the type of government they want to have, the right to democracy, to the right of the will of the people, the right to manifest their own destiny, right, without Russian oppression or Russian control. But it is just pure hypocrisy. And, the reason people fail to see this hypocrisy is because they're so caught up in their social media, their Netflix shows, following after celebrities, all of this nonsense that fills their brain, which enables them to actually have any sort of critical thinking. It enables them to actually think, you know what, let me go do some research on Google, read a little bit about these events to see what happened and make up my own mind. No, they just completely fall for the Western media propaganda, hook, line, and sinker without even taking a second to actually do some critical thinking and some critical research, right? And so just think about this. If the U.S. actually respects other nations' sovereignty, tell me, what do you think would be the United States' reaction to Mexico in its sovereignty making a military alliance with Russia, and then Mexico, in its own sovereign right, as its own nation, as its own people, allowing Russia to come into Mexico and to strengthen Mexico's military by allowing Russia to install military bases? And then what if Mexico, in its own sovereignty, right, allowed Russia to deploy nuclear missiles in Mexico? What do you think the U.S.'s reaction would be? Do you think the U.S. would respect Mexican democracy, Mexico's sovereignty, Mexico's right to rule itself? Absolutely not. Before Russia could even, set foot in Mexico, you'd have American planes and tanks all the way in Mexico City, right? And this has already happened before during the Cuban Missile Crisis. This is exactly why history is so important. You can't have a discussion about anything with history, even in your own personal matters, right? Even in your own dealings with your family or arguments with family members or whoever it is, you're always doing it on the basis of something that already happened, right? That's the reason when you argue with your brother or your sister, although of course you should always try and work out your arguments as a good Christian and forgive others, people always bring up the past because you have to understand the context on which the argument is taking place. And you can't have a good formulated opinion if you don't understand history. And that's exactly what Putin was doing. All of these knuckleheads in the media and all of these people that literally stoop their ears and just want to parrot what CNN and Fox News and all of these news organizations are saying do. They know nothing about history. They don't even know about America's history, let alone Russia's. And they're out here saying, oh, Vladimir Putin wants to conquer all of Europe. How insane is that? Putin clearly knows that he cannot attack a NATO nation or he's risking nuclear war. He's risking the destruction of Russia. If Putin tried to conquer the world like the U.S. is saying, nuclear war would break out. Russia would be destroyed. The whole world would be destroyed. So what good would it do Russia to attempt this if they're risking the extinction of their own nation, right? But the U.S. doesn't seem to understand that because they decided to meddle in Ukraine. They decided, hey, we're going to try to get Ukraine to join the NATO alliance threatening Russian national security. All the while, Russia kept warning not to do this, and the U.S. and its leaders, so power hungry, so money hungry, so manipulated by the military-industrial complex, ignored Vladimir Putin, and now they're coming to the realization that what is at stake here is a global catastrophe, a nuclear war. And so that is what Vladimir Putin was saying throughout the whole interview. He was telling us of Russia's history, of how we got here, right? And again, it fell on deaf ears because it's having no effect on the American public. Again, the American public is so brainwashed with its, streaming services, with its drugs and all of this nonsense, that they pretty much give their political leaders, those in power, the freedom to put their lives at risk in a way that, for reasons that are just absolutely false, right? They're giving these reasons for war that are complete lies. And as I stated, all you have to do is put the U.S. in Russia's position. If Mexico made a military alliance with Russia, the U.S. would go bananas, just like it happened during the Cuban Missile Crisis, when Cuba, right, under Fidel Castro, allowed Russia to install nuclear missiles in Cuba. Now, it's not part of America. It's supposed to be its own sovereign nation. But sovereignty, it's just a label that the U.S. likes to use, to further its own agenda, right? And this is what governments do. And so what did the U.S. do when Cuba allowed Russia to enter? Well, they completely lost it. They went full Karen, and I believe President Kennedy was the president at the time. His generals were literally asking for a nuclear war. I believe they were asking permission to strike Cuba first with nuclear missiles, but Kennedy had the intelligence, right? The reasoning to understand that they were insane. They were literally not understanding that what was at risk was the destruction of the world. And so, it's well known that it was one of the closest times in history where we were this close to an actual nuclear exchange. And so, if that was the closest point, right now has to be the second point. And unfortunately, as good as the interview was, it's not going to do anything to change the situation. The only thing right now that might change the situation is Donald Trump getting into office, which by all indications, it looks like he is. He's the favorite right now in the polls. Joe Biden has completely, messed up his chances with his base. His base is very angry at him for everything going on in Israel right now and in Gaza. And so, unless something crazy happens, it looks like Donald Trump is going to win. But again, it just, he's upsetting the military-industrial complex, these major corporations, all of these institutions that have this hatred for Russia and for Russia's society. They're going to do their best not to let Donald Trump get in, but I don't necessarily agree with everything Donald Trump says. But one thing that I do agree with him is that we need to put an end to this conflict because, again, this war is not winnable. You cannot win this war against Russia, right? Now, it's very risky right now because Russia is winning on the battlefield, right? They just conquered Avdiivka, um, another major stronghold of Ukraine. Uh, and, they're making advances, but the West, the U.S., is refusing to stop sending weapons and money. They're meeting resistance from the Republicans, and hopefully that will continue because if it does, this war is going to end. And again, Russia is not going to continue and attack Poland and all of these countries. Why? Because they understand that it will develop into a nuclear global conflict. And it doesn't benefit Russia, right? Russia is already the biggest country in the world. Um, they have never been an expansionist country, like we've seen throughout history, like Napoleon and Hitler, all of these conquistadors, these conquerors that literally win, or like Alexander the Great. As a matter of fact, Russia has always suffered under these dictators, under these empires and offensive military conquerors. And so we're just not living in that world, not in the nuclear age. We can't have these type of conquistadors anymore, right? These conquerors. And Russia understands that. And they understand that the U.S., that these NATO nations have nuclear missiles that can completely destroy their country and the world. And so right now, they're just reacting to the U.S. Threatening their national security right on their border. And they're actually being much more cool-headed than the U.S. would be if, Mexico decided to allow Russia to install military bases on their border with the U.S. They're acting much more cool-headed than the U.S. acted when Cuba made their military alliance with Russia during the Cuban Missile Crisis. And so right now, the Biden administration, these people in power, these corporations that are pushing this conflict, just don't seem to be doing any critical thinking as to the nuclear threat that we're talking about here. And so Trump seems to understand this, surprisingly enough, more than all of these people do. And I think that if he gets in office, he might not put an end to this war, on day one, like he said, but if he can stop the funding and the weapons from going to Ukraine, this war will end immediately. It's already ending. Ukraine is already losing. It's already in a desperate situation. And, if they don't receive more support, this is going to be over very soon. And I believe that Zelensky is going to be ousted from power and he's probably going to end up fleeing the nation. So I thought the interview was very good, but I don't think it's going to have any effects. I think the only thing that is going to change the situation, maybe, possibly, are the elections that are coming up in November. So, we're going to have a big major change in things, not only in the U.S., but globally, guys. Again, these things must take place, right? Wars between nations, earthquakes, all of these things, we know they were written in the Holy Scriptures. We know that these things must come about because all of the prophecies have to be fulfilled. But I would hope that we aren't the ones that have to see these things. You know, in God's mercy and grace, He can extend His mercy so that more people can turn to Christ for salvation, for deliverance from these things that will come upon the earth. We will have a World War III. We will have a nuclear apocalypse. Just as Peter, the apostle, prophesied in the book of 2 Peter chapter 3, I believe, he clearly prophesied in the Spirit that God would judge the world once more as He did in the days of Noah, at that time by water. In the end times, He would do it by fire. And He clearly said, and was very specific and prophetic in the details, and said that the world would burn as an oven, where the heat would melt the elements. And that's exactly what nuclear weapons do. Now, when he prophesied that over 2,000 years ago, humanity had not invented nuclear weapons yet. They had not discovered the power of the atom. And now we have the capability, so now we have the ability to fulfill those prophecies. And everything taking place right now is happening just as God said it would take place. But again, if people turn their minds, if they change their minds, we can have moments of peace, and that's what I would want. These things have to happen, and if they do, well, then let it be so. Glory to God. Trust in Him, draw nigh unto Him. Don't become anxious or scared of these things. Understand that there is a God, that there is a soul, that there is life after death, that there is a resurrection, that there is immortality and eternal life, if you can believe it. Anyways, that's going to be it for this video, guys. Quite a long video. Let me know your thoughts and your opinions on the interview. Again, I will be uploading more videos to the channel on these topics, on other things, so stay tuned.